To a follow-up tonight, an East Texas judge sentenced a Tyler man to nearly 20 years in prison after he left someone to die after a crash. 24-year-old Juan Juarez has now been convicted of accident involving death and sentenced to 17 years in prison. KLTV7's Lexi Vanetti was inside the courtroom.
In the Smith County Courthouse,
An appropriate sentence in this case is for 17 years confinement.
Judge Jackson sentenced Juan Juarez for conviction of accident involving death. Juarez was the driver in a crash in Tyler on January of 2021, where authorities say he crashed through a fence. His passenger, Marco Lopez Panado, was found dead in the back seat after Juarez reportedly fled on foot. The state argues Juarez lied about what happened.
He ran away to cover up the fact that this could have been an intoxication manslaughter case. So he got away with that part, but that doesn't mean that he should get away with what he did.
The defense argues
The idea that he, quote, as the state just argued, left his friend there to die. The testimony was no one, nobody, no even doctors on scene could have saved him.
the state says the nature of how Panado was killed
That was a freak occurrence. The accident was not freak at all. It was drunk driving at excessive speed in unsafe conditions, not paying attention to the road.
which led to Judge Jackson's sentence.
You're not being punished because of the accident. You're being punished and you were charged for your conduct after the accident.
Lexi Vanetti, KLTV 7 News.
And the state also called a detective who says based on criteria such as identifying tattoos and self-admission, Juarez would be considered a gang member. Judge Jackson says the gang involvement is not, quote, terribly influential on his decision, instead saying the decision is tied to Juarez's conduct after the crash happened.